Most recent past has been all around efficiency. How do we get value from AI, and what's the most effective way that people can use it so that we're getting a return on investment? How are we seeing business value from these tools? I wouldn't say it's completely changing. I still think there's a focus on ROI and efficiency and business value, but I think it's becoming a little bit more fully featured to say, well, what are the new ways of working? What are the additional things that we can do as a business? What are the new opportunities? What else can we do well that maybe has been bottlenecked before? AI enables us to get around those bottlenecks. I think the big question is, if we're able to really capture a certain percentage of the capabilities that AI offers, what does that mean for us organizationally? What does that mean for our structure and the strategy and the window around maybe efficiency to opportunity? It kind of shifts a little bit depending on a certain season. But at the end of the day, we're trying to balance those two things. We're trying to get immediate returns while also knowing that there's untapped potential there that we just have to figure out how to use it.
Neil, it's great to have you on the show today. I remember running into your profile on LinkedIn and feeling like I have to talk to this guy because your title and what you seem to work on at Salesforce was so cool. So I'm really excited to dive into it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully I'll live up to the hype. We'll see.
Yeah, I am sure. Well, maybe let's start by just defining what you do. You work at, I think, what's called Workforce Strategy and Innovation Team. Can you help me understand the mandate of your team and your role, and why does this team exist?
Yeah, so I am on, so the full fancy name is the Agentic Workforce Strategy and Innovation Team. We've slowly added on words over time, but really the mandate is to help Salesforce step into the AI future from a workforce strategy and innovation standpoint. So we're trying to think about what are the jobs of the future and how are people prepared for those jobs? What are the pathways for folks into those jobs? How are organizational designs changing and organizational structures changing, and all of the interesting questions that need to be answered that come along with that. So trying to get value from AI, but not leave people behind.
And I really have felt that Salesforce is sort of on the leading edge of this thinking around the organization of the future. So that's really cool. How would you differentiate your work with traditional HR or L&D or other functions that are thinking about this? How do you interface with them?
Yeah, so we're definitely partners and supporters of those, I guess you could say, traditional groups and organizations, where in some ways I would call it a strategic HR team, a bunch of different specialists with different backgrounds. So my background is in industrial organizational psychology. So think of myself as a workplace scientist, more at the individual level. So what are the components and features of individual jobs, of characteristics and skills and abilities of individual workers? But the implications from those kinds of lessons and things that we might uncover at an individual level can always aggregate up to teams and organizational levels. So I also work side by side with folks that have more of an organizational behavior or design background. We have futurists on the team. We have, as you could say, more technical kind of engineering background type folks from consulting. I think we're this interesting tiger team, if you will, of people that are trying to be strategic advisors and trusted advisors and guides to our leaders that are having to make really tough decisions right now. So we definitely play side by side with these other groups that are then, doing a lot of maybe the executional work where we might kind of set some of the vision and strategy. They then go and, take that and run with it.
So you're doing the more strategic lens. What do you think are capabilities that your team has, assembled and bringing to Salesforce that didn't quite exist before? What's required to make this actually work?
I know I'm a little bit biased by my own background and my own experience thus far, but I like to think that we have a bit of a specialty and an expertise in being very research oriented. So we want to make sure that we're doing pilots or we're facilitating workshops and extracting good data and compiling and synthesizing information from around the business and from some of our own, original research that we're doing to have evidence-based answers to questions that really there's not an existing, textbook sitting around saying, well, how do you have human talent integrate with digital talent? It's weird to me always to use the label in front of talent. We've only ever had human talent before. So integrating that is definitely a new world. And we have to be very kind of thoughtful and considered and intentional about how we're learning about that in the best way possible. So we're not having any adverse effects or impacts on things. We're trying to, mitigate downsides. We're trying to help the business still move quickly and at speed and be competitive, but to do so, as I said, in a way that's human-centered, people first.
As someone who at one point thought about getting a PhD, and if I got a PhD, it might have been in like org psych or something, like this sounds really fun. I would love to ask you, what are some of the biggest questions that you're currently asking and trying to like figure out in your team? You sort of mentioned it in terms of how does human and AI talent come together, but can you break it down a little further around the kinds of questions you're trying to answer right now?
I think for the most recent past has been all around efficiency and how do we get value from AI and what's the most effective way that people can use it so that we're getting a return on investment. It's very much how are we seeing like business value from these tools. But I think that is, I wouldn't say it's completely changing. I still think there's a focus on ROI and efficiency and business value, but I think it's becoming a little bit more fully featured to say, well, what are the new ways of working? What are the additional things that we can do as a business? What are the new opportunities? What else can we do well that maybe has been bottlenecked before? AI enables us to get around those bottlenecks. I think the big question is if we're able to really capture a certain percentage of the capabilities that AI offers, what does that mean for us organizationally? Like, what does that mean for our structure and even the strategy and all of that? So I don't know if that makes it a little bit more concrete or maybe it makes it a little bit more confusing, but I guess what I'm saying is that sort of the aperture, the window around maybe efficiency to opportunity it kind of shifts a little bit depending on a certain season. But at the end of the day, we're trying to balance those two things. We're trying to get immediate returns while also knowing that there's untapped potential there that we just have to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think what I understood is, when first AI came out, a lot of people were asking like a narrower question of how does an individual use it to get productivity gains from it. The scope is sort of increasing in how to think about AI and its implication.
Yeah, and that's natural in some ways. I mean, we have to start with the things that we know the best and the things that we can kind of wrap our minds around. And it's also a function of what the technology is capable of and what technologically we can do with it. And initially I would say it was more of at a unit level.
Like you mean a business unit?
I guess by the unit, I mean like an individual unit could be a task or it could be a unit is a job. So it's more at, I guess you could say, an individual level. And now I think we're getting more to a systems level where these things interact with each other. We're more thinking of workflows and operating models. And that's when there's changes at a unit level or a task or individual job level. But then when those things start to kind of compound and build on each other and they start to interact with one another, then you get those interesting conversations around, well, what's possible systemically?
It sounds like right now you're gathering real data from the organization to see what's working and what's not working. I also would guess that you are actively like guiding and directing certain experiments to get the answer rather than just like letting everything happen organically. Can you help me understand a little bit like how do you drive the right experiments in an efficient way as the central team that then has to interface with all these other teams that are busy doing their day-to-day work? Just would love to understand the dynamic a bit.
Well, you're sensing this. And it's definitely true that all of those things are very challenging. I like to call it coordination taxes to pay. There are teams that are at different levels of AI readiness. There are leaders that are at different levels of AI readiness. Some are far ahead, some are behind. There can be sort of variable within teams and within groups and leadership councils. That is all very challenging. There's also the element of sort of the disruption that you cause when you say, well, we're going to introduce this whole new way of working. And it's because we have all these new capabilities. Well, there's all of the other kind of constraints and, realities and logistics of that kind of change. And whether or not people are willing to pay that price and kind of go through that disruption, that really depends on where people are at. So it's a lot of meeting people where they're at, but at the same time, trying to help them envision a future that is attractive and feels like it's offering a new competitive advantage. And you have to push people to think that way sometimes. It's really hard to get out of your day-to-day. Well, we've always done it this way. How many times have you heard someone say that? Well, why do you do this? Well, we've always done it this way. To get out of that status quo thinking and not invoke that sense of like, ooh, this is a little bit scary and different. And what about all these reasons why we shouldn't and all of that? You have to be, diplomatic pragmatic and consultative, somewhat opportunistic as well, and saying, well, there are some teams that are farther ahead and they're trying things on their own. And so you kind of draft off of that momentum and that inertia that they're creating. I think that's in a perfect world where, if someone's listening to this and saying, well, where would I start if I'm interested in trying to push, transformation forward in my organization? I would say go to where there's already movement and people are overcoming that kind of coefficient of friction. Go there, of course, and try to work with them and partner with them. There might even be named transformation leaders that are already thinking this way and you just don't know what they're up to just yet. It is definitely forming partnerships, being patient sometimes, but also helping them kind of envision that future and get excited about that, because that then incentivizes change as well.
I can totally see why starting where the buy-in is already there and you don't have to fight the preconceptions helps a lot. It's like a classic, adoption curve, innovation curve. Like you start with the early adopters. If you think about, let's say you went with a team that is sort of bought in and starting to do stuff. What have you seen as the most effective way to engage such that you bring some of your expertise, but also it doesn't turn into too academic of an exercise that they really push back, or it doesn't really distract them away from their work so much the collaboration dies? Any learnings from best to partner with business leaders and their teams?
Yeah. So again, the answer is it depends a lot on where they're at, because they could be very, philosophically or emotionally ready to do things. But then it's well, beyond that, we don't really know. Right. And in those cases, you have to help them start to sketch and paint what that future could be. Because I'm a big believer in more of a process consulting model where the answers are in your clients' heads. They already have the answer. They just need help drawing that out and putting it into a structure or a format where they can start to see the boundaries and the shape of what that future could be. And so that's your job. Is not to be here you go, this is exactly what's going to happen, and do you agree with this, yes or no? It's really kind of walking them through that process. I think for the leaders that are saying, hey, we already know this, they've kind of crossed that threshold in their mind of saying we need to make things happen, but they don't really know what that actually looks like. I think a process consulting model can really work well, and to work with them and kind of give them the right prompts and the right questions to answer, and maybe even use some of the AI tools that you have access to help with that. And that's been very effective for us, is to help that be sort of a thought partner with us as we walk alongside people. But for those that are already doing things, there are teams and early adopters and AI champions that are doing cool things. They're pushing their group forward. They're already showing off cool prototypes. They're building. You might want to bring a little bit more structure to those processes where you're saying, well, why are we doing some of these things? So what's the business objective? And then how might we measure that in a way that is then compelling to, say, other business leaders or whoever that could be making a decision and say, well, now we want to invest in more resources like this. Maybe it's, more access and enablement and support in making sure that this is just an isolated incident. This is something that can really pervade and go throughout the whole team or the whole function. I think the best way to kind of get that kind of buy-in and support is to say, here's data to then kind of back up the fact that this is actually working. If you don't have a testable methodology for that, then it's always going to be just a field of flowers. And, you need to know which ones to pick at the end of the day.
Do you feel like you now have kind of a structured playbook, if you will, of meeting a team and sort of setting the vision, ideating things and figuring out a pilot? Or is it very different by team? How is it shaping up right now? And part of the question I'm asking is, I do think a lot of companies are trying to figure out how do we transform our organizations. This is one model, right? Which have basically a center of excellence that exists in the organization and going and transforming parts of the business and helping kickstart that process. And I think that people will ask, okay, if we were to do that model, first of all, who do we need? What kind of capabilities do we need? And how do we approach it? And I'm curious if you're seeing it as actually something that's kind of repeatable now, or it's super bespoke and different, and you need someone who's very flexible, adaptable, strategic consulting kind of folks that can come in and do very generalist stuff.
That is a great question with a lot of potential answers. The short answer is yes to what you just described, where there can and should be a playbook as a starting point to get people to feel oh, well, what could this engagement look like? Or how might you be able to help us? Or what's the first step? And that can really be a good conversation starter. And without that playbook, it's just, it's just talk at the end of the day. So it's helpful, but I have yet to find an engagement that looks exactly like a different one. I think think once you start to build some momentum and some success stories within a group, then that can kind of be a little bit more repeatable within a certain team. Like, so, maybe there's initially an effort to say, like, here's a new way of working and a new set of milestones, a new workflow. And then there's like an AI adoption and enablement phase. And then once you've kind of gotten to that, then it could be more of a repeated experimentation. And then you're starting to kind of build all those experiments together into a compiled body of knowledge. I think that can happen within an individual group, but across groups from, team to team or even leader to leader, it just really, really depends. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate locking yourself into saying like, it has to be this one way, because for all the reasons I said earlier, you have to meet people where they're at. Things are just constantly changing too much to feel like, oh, this is the one way that we do things.
Yeah, interesting. Any learnings you've had so far as you go into different teams to rethink? Like, what are the common challenges that you run into in actually having a successful engagement with them? I'm curious if you've starting to notice any patterns.
I think one of the first big challenges is to have leaders really recognize the need to change. And there are a lot of mental obstacles in the way where it's like, well, we don't have the resources. We don't have the time. We're already doing X, Y different things. This is another thing to add to that list, when really it's pretty existential that you start to figure this out and you start to think about it, at least, because you just have to, in my opinion. So kind of overcoming some of those mental hurdles can be a big one, and overcoming some of that, I guess, those kind of limiting thoughts, if you want to call them that leaders might have, like all the reasons this isn't necessarily worth their time at this moment. But, assuming, again, someone is energized by it, maybe they've been playing with these tools themselves, they kind of believe in the capability, the potential, they don't want to be left behind. They look around at peers and benchmarks and everything, and they're like, okay, yeah, we're in this and it's something that we've got to figure out. It can then be sort of like a technological readiness obstacle to overcome. And so there's access, but then there could be activation, where people just need to have, turned on the licenses that they have, access to, that you've purchased. And then it's an adoption piece where you're starting to really make room and make time for people to understand what these tools and systems can do. It's hard for me right now to feel like, well, oh, everyone's not already there yet. But I know I'm in my little bubble too. I look around internally and a lot of the other peers that I know of, and everyone's already kind of down this path. But I think probably for a majority of organizations, they're somewhere in that earlier phase, some of the earlier phases, whether, it's maybe like a recognition problem to overcome, but then it's more of a technological readiness piece. But again, assuming that you're already kind of there, then it's the organizational readiness piece, where there are cultural aspects that go into it. There's understanding that these tools and these systems are relevant to your job, feeling like you've got some of the agency. It's funny, we talk about agents all the time, but I'm really talking about the OG agency, human agency, where it's like, I have some control over how my day goes. And if you don't have that agency, then it can feel very overwhelming to be told, use AI, when you really don't have a lot of say in how your job gets done. It could be management support. It could be change management. So those are at least real human issues, which again, just as a organizational psychology person, I get, interested in all of those things. And I think those can be like the make or break components for most companies.
Have you gotten any insight into what allows people to change their mindset? Shifting from this is not relevant to my job, or I don't want to deal with this. And probably underneath there's other concerns they're not actually voicing, to them actually then saying, okay, let's do it. And not like begrudgingly, but actually like leading the effort. Like, I'm curious if you're able to help people make that switch.
Well, sort of outside of my day-to-day job, which the day-to-day is a lot of, again, kind of partnering with groups, with leaders, doing, pilot design, all of that. Outside of that, kind of those day-to-day efforts, I'm really interested in this idea of occupational identity. And if you have a tool that's saying, well, either A, you need to start completely over, or B, this tool, this technology is going to take your job away from you, it really threatens that occupational identity, right? Or, this, I like how some have called it FOBO, or fear of becoming obsolete. And, those I think are real undercurrents and fears that, maybe over time they've started to ebb a little bit, but we see this with the younger generation coming out of school. They've been told and promised that they have a certain occupational identity at the end of this educational experience. And now that's under threat before they even get started. And then you layer on all of the other, components that people don't like AI about, but which I can rattle off a few of those. but I think it's a good example of the fact that we're all kind of threatened by that kind of thing. So how do you address it? What do you do with it? Well, I think you have to consider ways to integrate AI into the occupational identity. There's this great study that looked at librarians maybe 10 years ago. I'll have to dredge it up again here, but they looked at when, the internet was first coming to libraries, and librarians were saying, well, before I was sort of like this keeper of where everything was, and, I'm sort of the curator of all this information. You come to me if you have questions. Well, now that's going away because of the internet. Well, librarians that were able to reconstitute, they were able to redefine their occupational identity with that technology involved. It's now, I'm not sort of the curator and the gatekeeper to this information, but now I'm the tour guide. I'm sort of the exposer, sort of the illustrator. I'm the person that's making this information come to life for you. That was like this really meaningful, effective sort of reorientation of someone's occupational identity. Now, I know that's like all really kind of abstract, but you're asking about undercurrents and like what's really driving people's like perspectives and motivations. And I think that's a big one. But that's where, enablement, I think enablement can be a very practical way. And I mean more than just how do you use this tool? What buttons do you click? How do you turn it on, get access to it? I really mean, can you add it into your workflow? And then with the agency to sort of like redesign your own workflow, that can then open up opportunities for you to come up with like a newly stronger than before occupational identity. I know that's abstract, but I think there's something there.
I think the idea of the occupational identity is like really powerful and frankly not talked enough about, because I think a lot of times the focus of the conversation in companies is very like task and like job level. It's still very oriented in this idea of, it's like an industrial revolution, maybe thinking around seeing humans as in a machinery, a input, like human resource to an output. But like humans have like more than that, right? Like there's aspirations, there's personal preferences and all of these things that are different. And I think the occupational identity is like a very human element of human as sort of a input to the system. And so I'm curious, are you getting people to think about this very explicitly at Salesforce? It's just sort of your thinking, but it hasn't yet been like implemented like in the organization?
Yeah, I would say what I just described isn't like fully like explicitly talked about. It's a little bit more of my thinking, but I do think there's a lot of investment and time around this idea of AI fluency. And so it goes beyond just do you have a license? Do you know how to use the tool? You're being asked to use it. So now you have some expectations around the number of interactions that you have. It's beyond that. And it is more of the understanding, how do you enable managers to help your team feel like it's a safe space? There's some psychological safety to experiment with it. And there's actually time cut out and carved out for in your day. And you're actually rewarded for doing cool things that might be a little bit experimental with AI, and for, demonstrating this to your team. Like, I think all of those systems and structures that kind of get built into this idea of AI fluency, I do think Salesforce is doing a good job with that. And we're investing in that and trying to help people kind of come along and be a part of the process and feel like they're a part of the change. The change isn't just happening to them.
That's like great change 101 for sure, where people feel like they're constructing the change. How does Salesforce think about doing that and activating the managers? And the context of this question, I think, is I sort of generally also agree that managers play an incredibly important role in your team, holding the space, inspiring their people to do their best work, right? I don't see that many organizations very intentionally investing in the managers as the activation layer of driving the transformation. And so like done kind of haphazardly. So it feels like Salesforce is doing that a lot more intentionally, but it is also a large organization. So how are they like handling it at the scale that Salesforce has to operate?
Yeah, well, there are definitely toolkits and resources and programs dedicated and focused on managers, like an AI fluency toolkit for managers. So you have some like specific, content and guidance for people in those roles. Managers, I mean, this is true across any organization, but they're stretched pretty thin. Like they're asked to do a lot. They're asked to be contributors, player coaches, and, people leaders all in the same day. And they've got a lot going on. So you have to give them even more air cover and content and support and resources So that's one thing that I know that it's a little bit easier when you have a big company and you have lots of teams that are kind of designed around those kinds of things. And that's just part of how they operate and everything. But the cool thing too is that there's ways of using tools like agents, like our own systems, our own tools that we create. So we have a manager agent that can answer questions, can help provide ideas around AI adoption. I think you have to bring all of the tools at your disposal to bear. And that's where using agents can really be beneficial. And I guess at the end of the day, it is like human AI collaborative in that way.
Yeah. Any key insights you've gotten around effective human AI collaboration by doing this work? Like anything you've learned around the questions that people are asking, which is what is the best way AI actually augments or works with humans? You're now seeing this play out in different kinds of jobs as different parts of the functions are transforming. And I suspect you're seeing some real successes in certain pockets that's becoming a real case study around unlocking value. Principles or insights that you've gained from those?
I'm trying to think of a way to describe this that kind of cuts across roles, because it can be a little bit different in, say, an engineering, tech and product context, which, the AI coding agents and capabilities are so powerful there. And they've been kind of operational for a while and they've got a lot of adoption. And I think even a little bit of a cottage industry around understanding what works well for like an AI assisted software engineer or an agentic software engineer. So I guess you could say that that's a really good success story. So let's just set that aside though. Across roles, I do think that there's way more of a focus on everyone being a builder in some fashion. So you could say vibe coding, you could say that's, using tools to build prototypes or maybe to build small web pages, simple web pages instead of slide decks, things that are interactive, things that are connected to other data sources, using tools that have a lot of business context already connected to them. So this isn't, it might sound like an infomercial. It's not intended to be, but Slack is very, very powerful for that reason. And I have found that there's been so much adoption within Slack because Slackbot has that contextual knowledge of the conversations, of the projects, of the individuals, of the org chart, of the history. And you can do so many cool things. And there's, new features and things rolling out all the time that increase the capabilities there. So any tool like that can offer that kind of contextual knowledge, that is very, very powerful. But as far as like the collaboration patterns, I do think the answer really depends on, the capabilities, where I might say that delegating tasks to the AI to do on my behalf is actually only a smaller portion of how I like to use these tools and what I find to be effective. I find it's more effective when it's acting as a thought partner with me. So I might give it like an objective or a task and have it ask me questions about that task. And then I will take the conversation and then use that conversation to create another prompt that I bring into a new session that I'm then able to build on top of that to actually get some of the work done. And that just helps me kind of flesh out that idea. And I don't then lose the construction of that task. I'm more kind of giving it the boundaries and the guidelines and making sure my approach is really, really well refined.
I love that. Yeah. I love the concept of everyone being a builder, and then like in that pushing that analogy, like you're the architect and the AI is helping you become like a better architect, and definitely not just seeing it as an execution assistant. Any things that have surprised you in saying, oh, I thought AI was going to be really useful here or have this level of impact here, but it actually has underperformed or hasn't quite delivered? I'm curious if you've seen.
In terms of underperforming, I used to use an AI writing tool for some of the writing that I do. And I used to like the interaction where I would write something and then you could actually highlight the section and then call the model to then respond to that highlighted section, just as if you were to have like a human editor or commenter on that. And then it would make some recommendations for me. I think that kind of back and forth to me felt counterproductive in the end, because by the time I went through a few iterations of that, I feel like I would kind of forget. I would lose the thread in my own mind. Like, what am I even talking about anymore? And I don't even recognize this person that is, like communicating and representing on the page. I've kind of moved away from that, where now, to more along the lines of what I said before, I have AI skills that walk me through a process, walk me mentally through the process, where I'll have an idea. It'll ask me a bunch of questions of that to make that idea better. And then I'll ask it to help me kind of outline some things. And then I'm say, don't write anything for me. Do not write anything for me. I will do the writing. Like, you don't worry about that. I might ask it for some polish and making sure, there's like good transitions and context and all of that. But at the end of the day, I find like I can see myself better in that end product than if I were to use it as like doing a lot of like the actual syntax creation.
I Fully agree with that. I think when you get AI to like write a lot of it from scratch, you actually like can't intellectually own that output because it is like
Mm,
a living
hmm.
thing. So I definitely end up like when I'm writing or things like that, I definitely want to write like all my core ideas in an outline and
Yeah.
structure it myself, right? Where AI might actually help is add some transition statements, but even then at the end, I always find myself like refining everything because it sounds so AI generated if you just look at the thing it creates. Maybe one last question for you. If you were to give a piece of advice for other organizations that are really thinking about driving AI transformation, and I think a lot of organizations, by the way, feel kind of stuck or stalled, where they're like getting everyone to just use AI, but it's like sort of having impact, but it's not really showing up anywhere in PNL or anything like that. People are not really rethinking workflows or being, strategic about the use of AI. What is your advice on how to get over that hurdle and start to use AI in a much more strategic way?
Organization that either doesn't know quite how to start or maybe feels a little bit stalled, you have to start smaller. That's my advice. But I feel like others have said that. You probably have heard about that in the past year or two. I guess the qualification I would say, though, is you do want to start small, but having some kind of business case that is higher level, that is more at that kind of competitive, it's more of a, you're kind of focusing on competitive advantages. You're saying, well, how does this all kind of fit into the bigger picture? You have to have that kind of bigger picture thinking as far as like really moving things forward and feeling like, oh, we're actually learning here. We have some success cases to build on. You're only ever really going to do that in a smaller scale first, rather than trying to feel like, oh, we've got to train everybody all at once, everywhere on this thing. I think you're going to have more, you're going to be able to build more momentum by starting at a smaller scale, but keeping the big picture in mind, like kind of knowing like directionally, this is why, and having that strong why statement.
I fully agree with that. Like it has to be manageable and digestible, but it has to matter. You're
Yeah.
important, you have to care about it. If they think it's so trivial and they don't care, then like it can never get the momentum or the sort of the leadership. Neil, thanks so much for joining and sharing. You're doing such cool cutting edge work, and Salesforce is learning things and that the world is trying to figure out, hopefully like at the cutting edge, and hopefully you'll continue to share with the rest of the world what you're seeing. But really appreciate you joining and sharing your insights today.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great platform to share, and we're all kind of in this together. So it's great to have an opportunity to share what we're seeing so far.
Awesome. Hopefully first of many conversations. I'll talk to you again.
Thanks, Vince.